Okay. Hello. Welcome back. Okay. This is chapter 17. And in case you're wondering what is going on me, it's my light thing. I'm on my fourth for right now. Okay. Our Quiet Home. By the Shores of Silver Lake was published in 1939. It became a Newbery Honor Book, an outstanding children's book of the year, just as on the banks of Plum Creek have been. The book as eagerly waited at bookstores, libraries, and schools all over America. Laura's books were selling thousands of copies each year. No longer did she worry about income to support Rocky Ridge from. The royalty checks from Harper and the Brothers paid more than the farm had ever earned. Laura was grateful for her royalty checks, and she was thankful for Rose for her idea and encouragement during the writing of the Little House books in January 1939. She wrote, Rose, yesterday I was thinking how unbelievable it is that we are so comfortably suited without your help. I would not have the royalties from my books in the bank to draw on. Laura tied her manuscript the hard winter it describes a blizzardy winter of 1880 through 1881, and Dave Smith how the first settlers in town survived in the middle of the rain. The book, Laura suddenly wanted to visit Dave Smith again. It was the 1st of June, where it's spring. The days were lovely, warm, going somewhere days. She immediately decided to travel on to the 1939 Old Settler Day in Dave Smith. Old pioneers, friends gathered in Lee and Dave Smith on June 10th. For the Old Settlers, Day reunions and festivities, friends thought we should not take such a trip by ourselves. Laura admitted, but manly declared that I had driven horses all over the country, the roads to it, and I could drive a car there. They promised Rose to drive slowly and carefully. If we find it too hard, we can come home anytime. Laura assured her. In Dave Smith, the Wilders enjoyed the festivities of Old Settlers' Day. Laura collected historical information to help her in writing and made a friendly visit to Aubrey Sherwood, the publisher of Dave Smith's News. The Wilders visited 3 days with Grace and Nate before driving across the plains to see Carrie in Kingston. Laura immediately drove with Carrie along the winding roads near Mount Rushmore, as they had done before. We talked together. Laura said, our childhood days and Palm Ma and Mary from Carrie's home to Wilders drove to Wyoming and Colorado and came back home for Kansas. As always, they were glad to return home. You folks have pretty places in this whole country. A friend told them. Manly and Laura agreed. Laura and Manly traveled no more. They settled down in peaceful days of quiet life. On Sundays, they drove to the Methodist church in the town, and Wednesdays they were in Manisville again for groceries and shopping. They attended church dinners and socials like to take long drives through Ozark country. I love to go for a drive as much as I ever did, Laura said. The daily routine on Rocky Ridge started early before cooking at 7 o'clock breakfast. Manly attended the 4 milk goats and 2 cats in the barn, and then he worked in the garden on his workshop. He split wood for the range, and he hauled it. To the house in a wagon drawn by the burro. We are not really farming, Laura explained. It was increasingly difficult to get help and lately impossible to do as wages. The farm could pay the beautiful lot because 48 acres were sold. Bruce Prock and his family moved away, so the tenant house and another pilot of land across the road from the farmhouse were also sold. This left the Wilders 130 acres of land, all in the pasture meadlands, with a tempered lot for wood. Laura's days were always busy ones. I do all my own work, she said, and to care for a 10-room farmhouse is not a small job. Besides the cooking and baking, there is churning to do. I make our own butter from cream of the goat milk. There is always sewing on the hand, and my mending is seldom finished. Every day when the mailman drove by, Laura left for a half a mile to walk to the mailbox. The water mailbox at the side of the highway was the biggest size automobile. Every day the box was filled with mail addresses to Laura Ingalls Wilder. Classes wrote her, sending big packets of letters and drawings and photos of themselves. Teachers wrote to ask for pictures and autographs and answers to questions their students asked about the Little House books. Patiently, Laura answered the mail. You will not be astonished by the number of letters Laura wrote to her new editor, Orissa Norabis at Harper and Brothers. I answered them for I cannot bear to disappoint children. At Christmas, their royal fans remember Laura in the months of Wilder, and the cards are also given right on her birthdays and Valentine's Days. Laura treasured each bit of affection for her books and her family. She proudly wrote in an apron handmade for her by a girl in North Carolina and carefully saved cartoons of admiring mail because Farmer Boy was such a popular book in the Little House series. Alonzo received his share of fan mail. He seems to have made it quite a hit with the children, Laura said in a letter to a college professor. Alonzo was surprised and pleased that they wrote to him. In 1940, The Long Winter was published. Laura's editor, Harper and Brothers, asked her to change her title to Hard Winter, picking the original choice sound to grand for a book of children. Laura carefully compiled. Laura worked on writing on the seventh book, which became Little Town on the Prairie. Whew. In the summer of 1941, the manuscript was sent to Ursula Nordstrom. The story of Laura Ingalls' teenage years on Pa's homestead in the town of Daysmith. Mrs. Nordstrom, Little Town on the Prairie, she wrote, Laura seems to be absolutely perfect. On the banks of Plum Creek has cut up. Now been my favorite, but I think the new one is even better when Nellie Olson came into school. I almost wept with passion and exception. Every single bit of the book is perfect. When it was published in 1941, Little Town on the Prairie became a Newbery Honor Book. Laura's 4 children eagerly assessed it and accepted the next book because it was where it was expected to marry a month, where it was announced that the 8th book in her series be her last in the next book. Where it really grows up, she says. The last book is the happy golden year stories of Laura Teacher, her courtship with Amanza, Pa and Ma's thriving homestead, and happy times in growing town of Daysmith, all brought to a close to long saga of the Ingalls family. Laura was pleased with great interest. These happy golden years, it always surprises me when one of my books is a success. I'm glad that it is selling so well, she said, letters powdered and praising these happy golden years, Carrie wrote, proud and excited with books. Rose to completed these happy golden years, she thinks. You did a fine job on the book. Laura wrote Orissa Nordstrom the final page of the happy golden years and concluded the line, the end of the Little House books. Laura was 76 and ready to retire from 11 years of steady writing. It seems my mind is tired, she explained. The refuses again on the book. George By, the New York agent who managed all Laura's businesses, her publisher publisher encouraged her to continue writing. He offered her a chance to write magazine stories and assured our brothers wanted more books. But Aura explained that she wanted to spend the rest of my life living it and not writing about it. And so Manly and Laura fell into the golden years at the end of their lives together. When they worked in the house and the garden was through, they played a cribbage and read their magazines and papers. They enjoyed the drivers and dinners with Netta and Celia Seal. Netta always cooked special meals for the Wilders' February birthdays. Both Manly and Laura remained keenly interested in politics and world events. Their newspaper and radio kept them informed of the news of World War II. Since the Wilders grew so much their own food, they were not much affected by the wartime. Food rationing, their trips in transit were limited by gas, though no longer could they think of the summer trip to South Dakota. As well as pointed to a distant friend, she can no longer visit. Our rubber is good, but our gas is short, or murmured, along with the rest of America. When she heard of the fearful wartime battles and loss of life in our quiet home, where I said it was hard to believe such terrible things are happening in the world. Despite the difficult traveling, Carrie was able to travel to Mansfield by train by Rapid City, South Dakota in the fall of 1944. It was a exciting reunion. The love of her early childhood, where I told her, has followed you all the way. Carrie enjoyed visiting Laura's friends and making short drives. The Ozark Mountains, Grace had died in 1941, and Laura had the right to write children that her sister Carrie and I are only ones of my family now living. Laura, Carrie, and Rose decided together that Paul's fiddle should be preserved in a museum in South Dakota. Seemed to be the right place for such an important part of the English history. Laura's books were appreciated there and were often promoted at Aubrey, Sherwood, and A. Smith. A student from Watertown, South Dakota, wrote Laura, I think you have helped a lot of boys and girls become interested in their own state. After my teacher finished the long winter of the kids, I never knew South Dakota had a history like that. So Paul's Fiddles went back to the prairie. It was accepted by the South Dakota State Historical Society, kept on display for many years in a museum across the Capitol building in Prairie. Children and adults constantly stopped at the museum to the fiddle. The greatest pleasure Laura received from her writing was the knowledge that Paul would not be forgotten. In this, she knew she had succeeded. So many children begged Laura for another book. That she was half prepared to begin one. I found myself constantly sentenced in situation in and what might be another book? Laura admitted, I must begin to think about it. She decided. Finally, Laura told Ursula Norshire that I will see if I can make the new book show. Daily Living found a credit on out of the time Laura sought for writing another book. Maybe it was close to 90, and he and Laura both complained how hard it was to hire any help from the house, yard, and garden. Rose is permanently settled in Denver, Connecticut, too far away to do anything but advise her parents through her letters. We like to live here, but wish our only child did not live so far away, Laura said. The Wilders had one last grand adventure equal to any of its friends in their early days on the prairie. On April 12, 1945, the same day that the President Roosevelt died, a terrific cyclone blew the Orzac Rocky Ridge farmhouse. The solid fruit on the big living room windows was blown, and shingles from the roof were scattered. The yard suffered more damage. Big old yokes were uprooted, split and twisted, and trees were burned down across the driveway. For 2 weeks, the waters could not drive out of the yard, and there was no telephone or electricity. The seals made their way out to Rocky Ridge, but many days passed before the trees could be cleared away. It was quite a return to the former times, being isolated with our cool oil lamps. For lights were reported. You see, Amanzo, I still have another adventure and escape. Railroad carriers would assure her that she and Manly were safe at the Missouri Catacomb. It was one of Laura's last letters to write her sister in June 1946. Carrie died. She was buried with the rest of the Ingalls family in the cemetery in A. Smith. While the Wilders were living life on the Rocky Ridge, Laura's books were becoming internationally famous. Immediately after World War II, the United States Department, at the urging General Douglas MacArthur, arranged for the Little House books to translate into German and Japanese. Because Laura's books provide accurate pictures of American life, she believed that Germans and Japanese will benefit from reading them. Laura's immediately started coming to Laura from Germany and Japan. Translations of Little House books were published in several other countries as well, much to Laura's amazement. Though you were far away and speaking in different languages, Laura wrote to Japanese children, still the things worthwhile in life, the same for all of us, and the same as when I was a child so long ago. In America, Laura's fame constantly grew. Librarians and teachers and families still stopped to see the Wilders and were shown around the house and yard by Manly and Laura. Children in the Pacific Northwest, and Laura, their favorite author, as she was president with Harry Hartman Award in 1947. A pool of $55,000 Chicago children clearly showed Laura was their favorite writer. This led to a celebration of Laura's 80th birthday in Chicago. A department store. She held a birthday party in Laura's honor on February 7th, 1947. Laura and Manly were invited to attend to appear on the Hobby Horse radio program, but they could not go. Manly was 90 and not strong. Laura would not leave him, so that the children would not be too disappointed. Laura mailed 200 autographs to the store, Laura telling all about her life since the Little House books. She was closed her letter with a message to her young readers. The Little House books are stories of long ago. The way we live in our schools are much different now. So many changes have been living and learning easier, but the real things haven't changed. It is still best to be honest and truthful, to make the most of what we have, to be happy with simple pleasures, to be cheerful, and have courage when things go wrong. The Little House books sold so well, the Harper Brothers arranged to publish new editions with the new illustration. Garth Williams was elected to the new drawings, since he knew little of the country described in the books. He decided to travel west to see it for himself. The first stop on the Garth Williams trek in the past was Manisville. In September 1947, he arrived to see the Wilders as he drove to gate at Rocky Ridge. He spied Laura picking up walnuts. When they went into the house to talk with Manly, Garth was almost overwhelmed. Imagine, he marveled. Here I stood with the hero and heroine of the Little House books. When could be more exciting, Garth Williams went on to visit the place Laura wrote about. When his travels were over, he began to recreate the Little House life in his illustration. It would take him 6 years to finish the book. The Waters knew that they were important bookstores, libraries, and schools across America. Even so, they forgot their long tradition of Rocky Ridge. They were eager to keep the land dedicated to the farming. They were concerned over what might happen to their beloved home in the future. They knew that Rose was not interested in returning to the old Juracs. A young couple, Harlan and Gerda Shorter, had purchased the Rock House and part of Rocky Ridge in the early 1940s. The Wilders watched their farming operation with interest, and in 1948, they made a decision. They want to be sure as to have the farm. One Sunday morning, Laura telephoned the Shorters and asked him to come for a visit. When they arrived, she said Manley sat on the porch swinging and offering to sell the Shorters their house and all of the remaining Rocky Ridge farm. They could pay it for $50 a month, and the Wilders lived there for the rest of their lives. The agreement was made. Manley said he was glad to have steady monthly income. Surprising news came to the Wilders in December 1948. The Detroit Public Library planned an open new branch library and named it for Laura Ingalls Wilder. It will be the first library, and it will be the first in the city named for a living person for a woman. Laura was amazed at the news. Unfortunately, she had to say she could not attend dedication planned for the spring of 1949. Manley was not feelable to be left alone, but Laura helped with presentation by sending a message short to be read at the ceremony, along with the original manuscripts for the long winter and these happy golden years, which were present to the library. Manley planted a garden during the spring of 1949, but at 92 he moved slowly and sometimes painfully. In July, he suffered a serious heart attack. Laura nursed him faithfully through his recovery. Nada and Zila Seal helped. They brought groceries and foods and drove Laura to town when she needed to go. Nada often slept on the porch during the night. In case Laura needed help. For the early fall, Manley improved, but on Sunday morning, October 23, he had a second heart attack. Laura quickly called Netta and Silas to come, but by the time that they arrived, Manley had died. Okay, I'm gonna take a break with this one. And we're on our last trip, though.